So the heart has 4 chambers. So I went through and I typed in some words on here to try to make it a little bit easier for you guys to take notes. Okay, so the heart has 4 chambers normally. The top 2 chambers are the atria, so the right and left atrium. So atrium is singular and, is singular and atria is plural. So if you were talking about both atria, it would be atria. They're the superior chambers of the heart and they're smaller. Okay, now it's easy to figure out the function. So their function in the heart is they're going to receive blood from the body. So they're going to receive blood either from the whole body or from the lungs. So no matter what, the blood is returning to the heart. The first place it's going to go is to the atria. Okay, now auricles, I have auricles on here. Auricles are just these little ridges that are found on the atria. They're little ruffles. They remind me of like a pastry, like an elephant ear or something. So they're just these little ruffles on there. So they don't really have a function. They're just a part of the heart. Okay, now the ventricles are the bottom 2 chambers, and they're the pumping chambers. So they're going to pump the blood to the body. So the right side is going to move the blood to the lungs, and the left side is going to move it to the body. So I hope that makes sense. So just remember, top we're going to receive the blood, and the bottom are going to pump it out. Okay, now internally, you're going to see a couple structures that you should have talked about in lab, I think. So in the atria, between them is an interatrial septum. So it divides the 2 atria, so it's the dividing wall. Okay, now think about if you were doing sit-ups all the time. So if you're doing sit-ups all the time, you develop a really tough 6-pack, right? You see, or 8-pack or 12-pack or whatever, and you see all the ridges of your abdominal muscles. In the pectinate, in the atria, because your heart is pumping all the time, it actually develops like a 6-pack, and we call those the pectinate muscles. So those are the ridges inside the atria. Okay, the ridges inside the ventricles, those are the trabeculae carni. Okay, so there'll be these little inside here. They're interiorly. They're the ridges of muscle. Okay, so they just have 2 different names. So pectinate are in the atria. The trabeculae are in the ventricles. Okay, now let's talk about the fossa ovalis. Okay, so the fossa ovalis is a fossil or a remnant of the foramen ovale. Okay, now, before you're born, when you're a fetus, okay, you have different circulation than an adult because the fetus doesn't need to breathe for itself. The mom is doing all the oxygenation, so the mom's doing all the work. So the fetus actually has a hole between the right and left atria, which is called the foramen ovale. Okay, and if you think about it, a foramen's a hole. We know that because we've talked about that. You guys have learned that before. Okay, and then ovale would mean it's an oval, so it's an oval-shaped hole, and it's right in here. It's like right in here. Now, when the fetus takes its first breath, the pressure changes cause that hole to close off, and when that hole closes off, it leaves the fossa ovalis. Okay, so that kind of makes sense. When you do the heart dissection, you'll be able to feel it. It's a thinner space in the interatrial septum. Okay, now the ventricles will have a septum too, so it's right here. And the cords are in here, and they're going to be they hold the valve closed. So you can actually kind of think of them as like a swinging door that has a chain that keeps the door from going the wrong way. The chain stops the door. So that's kind of what the chordae tendineae are. And sometimes they call them the tendinous cords. Now another thing that probably should be on here are papillary muscles. So the papillary muscles are at the base, and they anchor the cords. Okay, so you'll be able to see them really well when you do the dissection. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Okay, this slide is really just a picture of, it's really just a picture of dissected heart. And it's a human heart, so it's dissected. I wanted you to see a real heart, what it would look like. You can kind of see that the ventricles are much bigger than the atria. So they cut it in half, like longitudinally, so you could open it up. So I just wanted you to see that. Okay, now when we get to the great vessels, okay, so the great vessels are the vessels that are going to bring blood to and from the heart. So the first thing I want you to know, okay, or want you to realize is that you don't have to know A and B. Okay, so A and B we'll learn when we do blood vessels. Now, the next thing, okay, is I know you cover these in lab, so you need to know where they are. I don't know if it's worth it for me to go over them on here. I will. I'll take a couple minutes and go over them. So the first thing I want you to see is superior and inferior vena cava. Okay, so the superior vena cava is C, so I'm going to put SVC. It's going to bring blood back to the heart from above the heart. So it's returning deoxygenated blood, okay, or oxygen poor blood from above the heart back to the heart. Okay, the inferior vena cava is returning the blood from below the heart back to the heart. Okay, if you look, they dump into the right atrium. Okay, and they're blue because it's oxygen poor. If we trace the blood as it goes through the heart, okay, so it'll go back to the right atrium, okay, and then it's going to go to the right ventricle after it goes through the valve, and then from there, it actually goes out the pulmonary trunk. Okay, so E is the pulmonary trunk. So the pulmonary trunk is going to split, and when it splits, you have a right and a left pulmonary artery. The right one is going to go to the right lung, and the left one will go to the left lung. So it's going to take the blood to the lungs. From there, what will happen is they'll go to the lungs. Blood will go to the lungs. Okay, and that's where the magic's going to occur. So gas exchange will occur there. So gas exchange, carbon dioxide will be dropped off, oxygen will be picked up, and the blood will return to the lungs by the pulmonary veins. Okay, and here's pulmonary veins on the other side. So veins are here, veins are here. Let's see. From the pulmonary veins, okay, the blood is going to go to the left atrium. From there, it'll go down to the left ventricle, and from there, it'll go out the aorta. And the aorta is like the largest vessel coming off of the heart. And it's oxygenated blood. See, it's red, so it's oxygen rich. Okay, and it's going to carry the blood to the body. Okay, now the heart valves. So the purpose of the valves is to prevent backflow of blood through the heart. So you have to remember that the blood should always be going in one direction. It shouldn't be going backwards. It should be unidirectional flow. So the valves, their purpose is to prevent the blood from going backwards. So it's kind of like a door that you could only go in. You can't go out it unless something's wrong with it. It's broken. Okay, now I'm going to draw a little heart down here. My heart drawings are not profound, but okay, now the AV valves, they're called the atrioventricular valve if you write it out, okay, and you'll have to write it out for lab. The AV valves, that name makes sense, right, because it's atrioventricular, so they're between the atria and the ventricles, so they would be located right here. So those are the AV The one that's on the right is called the right AV, and the one that's on the left is going to be called the left AV. These guys do have other names, okay? So the right one is also known as the tricuspid. So I always remember RI is found in tri. Or I saw someplace else that said it's right to try. so so tri and right, that's the tricuspid. The left AV valve is called the bicuspid. Okay, if you look at these valves, most of them have 3 flaps of tissue, so 1, 2, 3. The only one that doesn't have 3 flaps is the bicuspid, and it only has 2, so 1, 2. So this is bi, right? And this is the tri. Okay, now the pulmonary valves, okay, the pulmonary semilunar valves, they're going to be found, they're located in between the ventricles, okay, and great vessels. So if this is the pulmonary trunk coming out here, and this is the right ventricle, the pulmonary semilunar valve is going to be right in there. Okay, now if this is the aorta, and it comes out of the left ventricle, the aortic semilunar valve is going to be right in here. Okay, so you'll see them, well, you'll practice the anatomy, and so that'll make it way easier. Okay, now, I left this picture in here. This is just what we talked about, but I wanted you to see a picture. So here's the bicuspid, and it's 2 cusps. And here's tri. Okay, tri. Okay, now, when you listen to the heart, okay, you are listening to the heart sound. So heart sounds like lub-dub, 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 right? That's what the heartbeat sounds like. Okay, the process of listening to the sounds of the body is called auscultation. Okay, and I think you talk about that in the very beginning of Bio 103. Okay, so here's my stethoscope, right? You listen with a stethoscope. Okay, so one thing that normal heart sounds sound like is usually they have what they call S1 and S2. So sound 1 and sound 2. So sound 1 is the lub, and sound 2 is the dub. So lub-dub, lub-dub, lub-dub. Okay, so what's causing the sound is actually it occurs when the valves are closing. Okay, so when the valves close, that's when you hear lub, is the AV valves closing. When you hear dub is when the SA valves, I wrote SA, it shouldn't be SA, it should be the semilunar, SL, semilunar valves closing. Okay, now, sometimes you hear extra noises, okay, and those are heart murmurs. So a heart murmur is like an extra noise. So basically what's happening is the valves aren't closing right. So something could have happened, someone could have had an infection, or it could be something that they were born with that would make a valve stiff or scarred, so you could hear it. So an incompetent valve is one that won't close properly. A stenotic valve is one that won't open properly because it's stiff. And then a prolapsed valve is one that's bulging. So normally the valves are pretty tight, like this. Okay, so if this is the valve in a coming from the atria to the ventricle. Normally it kind of looks like this. If it's prolapsed, right, it kind of looks like this. It's bulging backwards. So if you think about a prolapsed uterus or a prolapsed rectum, those are things that have fallen from their normal place. Okay, so they're hanging out someplace else. So not good. Now in the nursing program, you're going to take probably a whole class where you learn how to use your stethoscope and learn to listen for heart sounds. Okay, now these are links to the videos. So there's 2 videos. This one's only 2 minutes, and the links aren't live on here, so I don't know. I'll have to figure out how to do that. But they're live in the PowerPoint. They're hyperlinks. And then here's a little lecture from Khan Academy, and the guy does a really good job explaining it. Okay, now I'm going to stop here